Warning, this episode contains expletives. Welcome to Planet Poetry. I'm Robin Houghton.
And I'm Peter Kenny. And welcome to the first of our second series.
Yay!
It's good to be back, isn't it?
It is.
So, yeah, where have you been, Robin? How are the Broads?
The Broads. Oh, we had a lovely holiday in Norfolk, but the day on the Broads, I must admit, I was a bit of a nincompoop. I've discovered I don't know how to steer a boat. So my one attempt ended in the bank, and then the guy in the boat behind was giving me a slow hand clap. It's all very, wouldn't call it boat rage, but there's an awful lot of boats on the Broads, and people don't have much patience with you if you're a novice. So I let Nick do the steering, and it was all very lovely.
Yeah.
How about you? You haven't been off on a slow boat anywhere, have you?
No, Lorraine and I went off to lovely Wales, and I can't remember seeing such steroids of rain for a long time. Absolutely soaked. You know when you've got your little Berg house on, and then you get home and realise your shoulders and everything are all wet underneath underneath the anorak. It was great though.
And you're going to tell us a bit more about that later on, aren't you?
We'll talk about holidays later, but enough of all that.
Yes.
Let's hear what Kim Addonizio had to say to Robin.
Today, I'm thrilled to be talking with Kim Addonizio. California-based Kim is the author of 7 poetry collections, 2 novels, 2 story collections, and 2 books on writing poetry, The Poet's Companion with Dorian Laux and Ordinary Genius. She also has 2 word and music CDs, the wonderfully titled Swearing, Smoking, Drinking and Kissing with Susan Brown and My Black Angel. Kim's poetry has been translated into many languages, and her collections have been published in China, Spain, Mexico, Lebanon and the UK. Her awards include 2 fellowships from the NEA, a Guggenheim, 2 Pushcart Prizes and other honours. Penguin published her memoir, Bukowski in a Sundress, Confessions from a Writing Life, and her latest collection of poems, Now We're Getting Somewhere, was published by W. Norton in March 2021. Kim Addonizio, welcome to Planet Poetry.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I wonder if you could start by way of introduction by reading a poem, please.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I will read this one that's in Wild Nights, which is the book that Blood Axe published in the UK. Which is sort of a selected poems. And this is called White Flower, Red Flower, from some teaching that I do in Italy every couple of years. White flower, red flower. He spent a year playing death in La Traviata, ruining a camellia in the first act, and smoking a Gauloise in the last, while Violetta succumbed. Here in the former monastery, the monks succumbed, giving way to the 4 of us drinking Sagrantino and telling stories in the gravel courtyard under the pasta-shaped stars. Out in the olive orchard, a mouse succumbs to a screech owl, and down the hillside, the old painter who owns this place is yielding slowly to cancer. But today, she recited Montale's poem, The Sunflower Crazed with Light. And today we saw the white dog, whose job it is to guide a few sheep out of Chagall's canvases into the lushness of the present moment. That moment has already succumbed to the next, but here we still are, sitting at a small round table in the dark, drinking darkness from our glasses, growing dizzy with darkness. Past midnight now, the date turned over, date of my friend's birth, so more darkness is poured. In the Chiesa is a painting of Jesus emerging from his tomb, hatted like a Veneto farmer. In our room is a red-robed virgin, tiny adult savior on her lap. A cracked and mottled mirror on the marble-topped wood bureau, sepia family portraits on the walls. Grandio morirsi Giovanni, sang Pavarotti and Sutherland, Alfredo and Violetta. She was surprising brio for someone about to droop dead into her lover's arms. But what difference your age? Everyone's here until they're not. Gone, but in some weird way still hovering in the air, in a cracked mirror, in the eyes of those grandparents and great-aunts. Enter from stage left the red shock of wings, a disturbance in the trees, easily mistaken for wind.
Thank you. I just think that's such a beautiful poem. I saw it, I think, in Poetry Review, and it's now on my potting shed wall. I've got a wall of poems that I've chopped out of magazines and things.
Oh, beautiful.
Not your average poem about the possibility of death and dying and moving on. I thought it was typical of your work. It's in one stanza for the listeners, and it seems to kind of move from one thing to another, and yet it never goes very far away, and it's very unexpected, the detail. I like to reach for your work when I'm feeling stuck in some kind of, I'm trying to write and I'm just stuck in cliches. And how do you dig yourself out of cliches? And I find I've only got to read your work and it somehow gives me a real kick. I sort of feel like I've had an electric shock, like this is how I should be writing. I was just thinking, for you, what happens when you're writing if you're feeling this isn't happening? I mean, do you just put it down and do something else? Or are there any poets that you go to because you know they're going to give you a kind of a jolt of energy or something that's just going to get you going again?
Yeah, reading is so often the trigger for something to happen. I look for those writers too that sort of trigger me and wake me up to language and get my writing going in some way, because I spend a lot of time, like every writer, beating my head against the wall and going nowhere and writing a lot of garbage and feeling like I can't write and, all those things that we all feel. And there are so many times like that. And reading is really the answer for me, to read someone whose language inspires me and wakes me up to some possibility or some idea or some so that's pretty important to me. Like Dennis Johnson is a writer who's, wonderful prose writer who, if I'm writing prose, I will read his sentences and mine will become mysteriously just some fraction of a percentage better just by reading him and taking that in. But he's also a wonderful poet, which I mostly discovered after his death. So he's one of the writers. Lately, Diane Seuss is another one, American writer. Terrence Hayes. His sonnets for My Past and Future American Assassin. It's changed throughout my writing life, who I read and who triggers me and what that triggers in my writing. And I'm always trying to look for new writers to inspire me and new ways to write so that I'm not writing the same way that I wrote my first book, say.
Yeah.
Now I'm on to my 8th or something like that of poetry.
8th book of poetry, yeah. And you're right, as you say, you write short stories and novels as well, I think, don't you?
Yeah.
And also, as we heard in the biog, you've written books on the craft of writing.
Right.
You came to poetry relatively late, I suppose, kind of in your 20s, wasn't it? I mean, not that late, but did you feel at that point that you had to play catch up, that you had to do a lot of reading, or were you already someone who read and was, in the poetry world? Or
yeah, well, I read, but not poetry. So I really discovered poetry at about the age of 28. I know I'd been exposed in school earlier, but nothing really stuck, And I think I felt like I had to play catch up because I had been in music, and music. I was very much behind in music, studying classical music when I first went to college with, kids had been playing since they were 4. And I had never heard classical music before I tried to become a classical singer, which was crazy and which I eventually failed at. So when I discovered poetry and decided I needed to pursue it, I think I was in my senior year of college. I dropped out a couple times when I was going back to school at San Francisco State. And I think I took a creative writing class my senior year. And so that was all new to me. And I felt like, well, God, everybody must know so much more. And I was in school with a lot younger people because of having dropped out a couple of times, I was a bit older than the other students. I was 28 and graduating, and then I went to graduate school after that, so in my 30s. So, of course, at the time I thought it was late. Now I look back and think that's nothing. These, people go, oh my God, I'm turning 30 or 40. And I just laugh at them like, you're babies. You don't know.
Well, that's true. That's true. But I don't know about in America, but certainly in this country, if you hit 35, then all the possible awards and things seem to drop away. The kind of, the kind of things that say, yes, I'm now on the path of being a writer.
Yes. Yeah. I published my first book at 40. So
very inspirational story, I think. but you're clearly someone who's sort of, you said you failed at music, but clearly you were a very good musician, and it sounds like you're good at a lot of things.
I love music, and I'm a passionate amateur. That's where I am with music. So I explore a lot of different instruments and play some of them competently and none of them masterfully.
I was very pleased to see that you're an admirer of Dante, and he crops up in your poems and in your book Ordinary Genius. I wonder if you might talk a bit about that and how you got into appreciating Dante. And you're going to read a poem, I think. Yes,
I'm happy to. Well, I full confession, I haven't read the entire Divine Comedy.
Oh, that's fine.
Only the Inferno, although I have some sense of how it turns out. But I read the Inferno in John Charity's translation many years ago, and it just always stayed with me, and it's become one of those touchstone works. Certain books or certain movies or plays or ideas become sort of important to you at different stages in your life, and you often go back to them. And I think that he's someone that I reach into to think about or refer to, in my own sort of private pantheon of words and thoughts and ideas.
Yeah. I wonder if you would read Blues for Dante.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I used it in Ordinary Genius, which is one of my books about writing, in order to sort of talk about how you can lie in poems, actually. So this is Blues for Dante Alighieri, and there's a quote from the Inferno, Canto 4, without hope, we live on in desire. So I was writing this poem about a wonderful trip to Italy with a lovely boyfriend, but I was interested in exploring that idea, without hope, we live on in desire. And that's really what created the tone and mood of the poem, which was not at all the tone and mood of the actual experience. And it's in a blues stanza. So, our room was too small, the sheets scratchy and hot. Our room was a kind of hell, we thought, and killed a half-liter of Drambuie we'd bought. We walked over the Arno and back across. We walked all day, and in the evening, lost, argued, and wandered in circles. At last, we found our hotel. The next day, we left for Rome. We found the Intercontinental and a church full of bones, and ate take-out Chinese in our suite, alone. It wasn't a great journey, only a side trip. It wasn't love for eternity or any such crap. It was just something that happened. We packed suitcases, returned the rental car. We packed souvenirs, repaired to the airport bar, and talked about pornography and movie stars. And you, as a Dante person, probably know that the last word in the Inferno is stars.
Indeed, yeah.
So that was also my little Dante tribute, along with the circles and other little
exactly.
things, right?
So I seem to have taken you on a kind of an Italian trip here.
It's my heritage, so.
So you said it was in a blues pattern. I'm not familiar with that. Is that like a particular form?
Yeah, one of the standard blues forms is a line and then a repeated line that often may torque it slightly, and then a third line that's kind of a turn. So it rhymes A as a form. Uh-huh. And so I take some liberties with that, but that's the basic structure of the piece. Okay. Yeah.
And it even looks a little like the terza rima of the comedy in its 3 lines.
Right, and it's also in 3-line stanzas. That's the blues form, so it's kind of
that's cool.
Yeah, a nod to the terza rima too.
And quite a lot of 11-syllable lines in there as well, I see as well. Quite very clever.
Yeah, you got it. Because, it takes someone to know some of that stuff to really unlock those other levels.
You can sometimes unlock the other levels, but even if you don't, when there's still plenty in there to enjoy and appreciate, that's good poetry, isn't it?
Yeah, I just want there to be a there, like I wanted to have something on the surface that will draw anyone in, that anyone can get or mostly get or feel whatever is there. But then I want there to be something further if they investigate, if they really decide to take a deeper dive, there are things to find.
Which is fun. Makes it fun, doesn't it?
Yeah, I love that.
Now, in Mortal Trash, you've got a sequence of sonnets after Shakespearean sonnets, so they're numbered, aren't they? The number of the Shakespearean sonnet and the number of your kind of response to.
Right.
I was fascinated by these. I'm not really all that familiar with all the sonnets, obviously, some of the famous ones. And one or two of these sonnets of yours, I was left sort of thinking, wow, my head's going to explode, not quite sure what's going on here. And yet I absolutely love them. Can you give me a bit of background to this?
Yeah, as you probably know, there is a sort of drama of the Shakespeare sonnets. I think there are 154, something along those lines. And there's a sort of drama there where the poet, who's an older man, basically falls in love or has a connection to this younger man and is urging him to have children and all of these things. And then eventually, towards the end, there are these Dark Lady sonnets where there's a love triangle happening, basically. And there's a lot, of course, about mortality and living on and how you might live on in art or children. And so what I did was I flipped the script so that it's about an older woman in love with a younger one. And then a dark gentleman comes into the sonnets. And I did it I did 14 of them altogether. Right. So it's sort of an overall uber sonnet with a lot of sort of Vulcan mind meld with Shakespeare mixed in. And I can't remember how I got that idea, but I just started reading Shakespeare and looking for and I don't think I had ever actually read the entire oeuvre of Shakespeare sonnets either. So, and then I was reading them, and I was also reading Helen Vendler's criticisms and learning about a lot of the things that were going on in them. And that just really got me interested in this idea of a way to sort of use them for my own nefarious purposes. and that's what happened.
And some of them are sort of impossible to read, aren't they? Out loud, I mean, because you've got kind of lines of brackets and symbols and things. It's like some computer code gone nuts or something.
There was one it literally was just a mistake on my computer, and I looked at it and I went, that's kind of perfect for that line, because it's "let me not to the marriage of true minds," right?
Yeah.
And it's a moment when the speaker is very jealous because the younger lover is getting married, the woman is being with someone else. And so it made perfect sense for the sort of the typography to go crazy at that moment, like your head is exploding with this feeling.
I sort of imagine your publisher looking at that and saying, "Is this right?"
I know.
That was pretty funny. Would you like to read one of them, or one or two of them, or
yeah,
even,
I'd love to.
If you have your Shakespeare to hand, you could read the original first if you wanted.
I do, in fact. There's one I'd love to read you.
Excellent.
This is Sonnet 57. And it's a very kind of, on the surface anyway, a very abject sonnet, a sort of "I'm a fool for you." But then again, I feel there's an underlying sort of "screw you" note of potential irony and sarcasm here, or a self-recognition that, oh God, I'm so pathetic, kind of. And that was what I was working off of. So I'll read the Shakespeare and then read my version.
Great.
Being your slave, what should I do but tend upon the hours and times of your desire? I have no precious time at all to spend, nor services to do till you require. Nor dare I chide the world without end hour, whilst I, my sovereign, watch the clock for you. nor think the bitterness of absence sour when you have bid your servant once adieu. Nor dare I question with my jealous thought where you may be, or your affairs suppose, but like a sad slave stay and think of naught, save where you are how happy you make those. So true a fool is love that in your will, though you do anything, he thinks no ill. So you can hear a little bit of the sort of doth protest too much in that, in a certain way.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a real truth in that, you know, in the way he's feeling, that those feelings of jealousy and pain. So here's my 57. I hate hearts. Please don't have one. I wish you wouldn't call me. I'm not waiting by the phone, by the light of the clock. In fact, I'm really busy right now, describing things. That takes a lot of time. You'd be surprised how much drinking and looking out the window it requires. There's not much room for anything else. All I need is a closet, really, a little space for a shoe. And I can live on crackers, no problem. I love crackers. Are you eating some now? What do they taste like? Are you taking them in your mouth, then kissing? My princess, I remain your sickening servant.
that is brilliant, isn't it? I mean, actually, that first line grabbed me anyway. I was going to ask you about first lines, because I think quite often that you do the killer first line thing. I mean, I hate hearts, please don't have one. We all want to read on as soon as we've read that. Is there something that you advise students on or pull them up on? Like, you know, that first line, it's got to grab you, really, hasn't it?
It does. I believe in those kind of first lines that just, I mean, there are certainly lines of poems and stories and novels that start slowly, and that's great. But I am a fan of sort of grabbing someone right away and saying, hey, I have something to tell you, or seducing someone into a poem. And so the first line is so important to me, and I may be writing along and not finding it, you know, but when I find it, it's like a kind of energy field almost. And then I want the poem to sort of live up to that energy and run on that energy. And it doesn't necessarily happen in the first draft, but if I can get a line like that to get started with, it seems to allow some kind of an energy in that I might be able to follow.
Yeah. Some
kind of a flow. And often, you know, this has been said often about poems, you know, that in drafts of poems that there's sort of the warm up, the throat clearing, the on ramp. And often in student poems, I will help them to see that they've done that for a few lines, and then they hit the money line.
Yeah.
And that's the line you want to begin with.
Yeah.
That's the place where the energy really starts. And that's, for me, where I want the poem to start.
I think that's really good advice. Absolutely. And talking of energy, in your book, Ordinary Genius, and you say, go carefully into the territory of the explicit. Is this something that you go into carefully yourself? So I feel that you have no fear as to where you're going to go. And quite often, you know, I'm left jaw dropped sometimes, like, well, did she really say that? And yet it's so effective and so integral to what you're expressing.
Yeah, well, I mean, for some people, it's not, you know, those kinds of words are not natural to use, and there's no reason to graft them on your vocabulary. I mean, you have to, you be you,
yeah,
whatever
yeah.
that is,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
You be you, and the territory you go into should not be someone else's. It should be your own. Mm-hmm. And that's really important, to find your own territory. But you know, in my case, I grew up hearing fuck you around the house quite often. So it's sort of part of my vocabulary, for better or worse. But I'm also aware that, you know, you don't want to use it for just sort of pyrotechnics or shock effect. You know, you want to think about when you're using it and why you're using it. Any kind of, I mean, all words really, but particularly if you're going into certain kinds of diction, you want to be aware of what that is, and you don't want to use it gratuitously. It should be in some way integral to what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I've taken some words out sometimes because I realized I've gone back and looked and said, oh my God, I've said shit again. I really didn't need to say it that many times. Or in a collection, you know, I'll suddenly see some word that just seems to appear. It begins to look like a facial tic to me that I want to sort of smooth over in some ways.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you to read a poem called Florida. And part of the reason, I thought we'd lead into this gently, but part of the reason is, it's just, I remember reading it and seeing the title. And again, titles I find titles really hard myself. I'm always making up rubbish titles, but Florida, okay, something happened in Florida, sunshine, Trump or something. And it kind of goes in a completely different direction entirely. So it's just one of those poems that makes you want to sort of, not quite sure whether to laugh or not. Am I allowed to laugh? That kind of thing. So I don't know what you think about that. Is that the reaction you're after?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, sure. Florida. And then there was the man who said, "You look fatter with your clothes off, and like a fool I didn't put them back on," but climbed into his bed beneath the little Tibetan prayer flags and several images of Buddha haloed by a white light I wished at that moment to dematerialize into, especially when he asked me to get on top, but facing away from him, so that I rose up and slid down, looking at the knees and naked feet of someone whom an hour ago I'd found attractive. In a way, I realized it was now a blessing not to have to look into his eyes, but still, being fucked backwards while facing a stain on the wall that resembled Florida was not quite the encounter I'd envisioned, standing in the bookstore that the Beats with their Blakean visions and wholly passionate excesses had made famous. And my mind began to wander in order to avoid being present for whatever was going on down there. Eternally, it seemed. And was that really his penis? It felt like a speculum as he groaned, and I gazed at Florida, thinking of orange groves, and all the nights in Pompano Beach my brothers and I played lighthouse tag, dodging the beam that swept over the black sea and pale sand. And of all the days I spent shirtless, climbing palm trees, or squatting with a stick over a washed-up blue translucent man-o'-war quivering in the wind. And of the time I dug a sandpit, hoping to trap my crazy, violent older brother, anchoring the sharp swords of sticker plants upright in the bottom, covering the hole with a blanket and just enough sand. And how was I going to lure him in there? Maybe I could get him to chase me. He was always chasing me. I could feel my anger and the great happiness of impending revenge, imagining him falling in, wishing I could cover him over and bury him forever. While somewhere in the orange-scented light of a candle in the universe behind me, my lover finished, and I closed my eyes, and never, until now, turned around to look at him, sinking beneath the surface of the bed like a drowning sailor, thrown overboard from a great ship that centuries ago rounded the Cape and sailed on to another world.
That's a great poem, isn't it? What a story.
Thank you.
Something else you say in your book about, and this is something that crops up, this business of using the I, first person. Maybe if you're not comfortable with using I, is to go into it like the third person. I kind of like the idea of taking the third person and then going into the I, and then people assume it is you. Do you find you change from third person to first person or the other way around from time to time?
Yeah, I think at the beginning, when I was first writing and I had a very plain style, sort of influenced by early C.D. Wright, who was influenced by Frank Stanford. And a lot of their poems would begin, a woman does this, or a man does this, or a man and woman do this. And I sort of adopted that myself early on. The way you do, you imitate, which I think is a great way to learn. You begin by sort of imitating your heroes and then gradually making it your own. And so I think I did that at the beginning a lot more than I do now, where I feel very comfortable that the I is a kind of persona and that I'm stepping on a stage like a singer-songwriter. We don't necessarily assume that all their songs are directly autobiographical when they're singing about lost love, or when a singer is selling a song that they have not written, right? But it's totally believable because they find, or an actor is performing a role that is not them, and yet they're reaching into parts of themselves to create that role. And that's what I feel I do in poems. And I'm very comfortable with that now. I'm here to write the poem and say what I have to say.
Yeah.
And people will take all kinds of things from it, some of which I intended and some of which I didn't. And I have no control of that, once it leaves. There are things I put there, but who receives them and how they receive them is very individual. And that's beautiful. That's what makes it art.
I'm with you. Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. I wondered if you might read the poem about your daughter, which is very beautiful. The name that means holy in Greek. Is that true? Does it mean holy in Greek?
It does. Yeah. It's one meaning of many that we found out. Her name is Aya, A-Y-A, Aya Cash. She's an actress. And this is one that I wrote for her. One of a few that I've written for my beautiful, lovely daughter. As all daughters are beautiful and lovely.
Of course.
So this is name that means holy in Greek. Today I heard your name shouted by a short order cook, flipping scallion pancakes in a grease-grimed Chinese restaurant. He said it meant wow, which is the best word I know for the unutterable sublime. Wow is how I had the dumb luck to become your young and terrified mother, not knowing how to hold you in the hospital parking lot while your father got the car. It seemed to take a long time. Wow, it seemed to take 10 minutes for you to get your driver's license and move away to New York. I remember the moment we made you and knew we had. Your father lifting himself up off the bed and laughing. Little hawk, Sumerian goddess, Kachina that races the wind. The verses of the Quran are ayahs. In Japanese, full of color or beauty, though once inked for me as tomorrow's arrow. The secret ingredient in the chef's special, a marinade containing ayah. First word spoken by a rose. Last word the trees say at night as they lie down in the forests and fields. Last sound I'll make, if I can still speak at the end, my palindrome, sword, storm wind.
That's just so moving. And I just love the way it starts with the wow and the 1 minute she's a baby, next minute she's got a driver's license. But you managed to avoid any sentimentality. Does she like the poem?
I think so. I mean, I think she's read most of my books and, mostly people, when they're starting out young, worry about their parents reading their work. I worry about my child reading my work, so vetting my work with her is really important to me. I probably have some people that are angry at me. I mean, I can imagine that some people might have a hard time with something that I wrote, but it's my story to tell.
It is.
Too. Yeah. They're welcome to tell theirs.
That's a good way of looking at it, I think.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about your latest collection.
Well, I have a new book called Now We're Getting Somewhere. It's only available in hardcover right now, but the paperback will be out at some point.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it came out during the pandemic, of course, in March 2020. No, wait, it came out this year. I'm sorry. It came out in 2021. So it'll be next year and it'll be in paperback, by then. But the book that's available in the UK where you are is Wild Nights, which is a sort of selected poem published by Blood Axe that has samples from a lot of different books.
Yeah, that's a very good overview or introduction to your work, I think. Anything else you'd like to tell us about that you're working on now or future plans or anything like that?
I'm just trying to write some poems, really. I've been slowly working on a new essay collection after Bukowski in a Sundress, which was my sort of memoir in essays about the writing life and my mother and being a daughter and, lots of different things around that. But, and I have some new essays, but I've been very slow about it and is not really inspired. And there's something I want to get back to, but always, I want to write poems. I've just gone through a series of upheavals with moving and lots of things have been happening recently. And now I'm finally trying to get settled down to do some new work.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to seeing some of that coming through the magazines, what have you, at some point. would you like to read one last poem? Maybe something from the new book?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Yeah, this is the last poem in the book now. We're getting somewhere.
Uh-huh.
And I like to say that it's for anyone who has gotten within a mile of thinking about ending their life. It's called Stay. So your device has a low battery and seems to drain faster each day. Maybe you should double your medication. You might feel queasy, but also as if the spatula flattening you to the fry pan has lifted a little. So your breath comes out scorched, so what? Inside, trust me on this, there's a ribbon of beach by a lake. In the sand, fragments of a fossilized creature resembling a tulip. Back in the Paleozoic, online wasn't invented yet, so everyone had to wander alone and miserable through the volcanic wastes, or just glue themselves to a rock hoping someone would pass by. Now you can sob to an image of your friend a continent away and be consoled. Please wait for the transmissions, however faint. Listen, when a stranger steps into the elevator with a bouquet of white roses not meant for you, they're meant for you.
That's beautiful. That's a really uplifting way to end, I think.
You know, it caused a little bit of a white rose run on. I had a friend who lost an eye recently from a fall, and she and her friends gave her white roses. Because she said she had read that poem to them and said that's just what I needed at that moment was to hear that poem. And so they bought her a dozen white roses, and then my boyfriend showed up one day with a dozen white roses, and it's become a little sort of thing, you know, rippling out to give people white roses, which has been really lovely.
Oh, that's nice. That's really nice. I think we all need white roses at the moment anyway, don't we, for whatever reason.
Yes, we do.
So that is great. Kim, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It's been fantastic.
My pleasure, absolutely.
So I enjoyed that interview with Kim Addonizio. I had a sort of mental image of what she'd be like, and she surprised me, really. I didn't... All the stuff, for example, about her Vulcan mind meld with Shakespeare. And
that was fascinating, wasn't it?
Yeah, I really like that. And the idea of her translating Dante into the blues.
She's kind of in a school of her own, if you like. And I mean, I don't know how well known she is to our listeners, but I first heard her read at the Aldborough Festival and really liked her work. And then I was lucky enough to see her again at Cork Festival, and I've got the Blood Axe book that she talks about.
Is it Wild Nights?
Wild Nights, yeah, Wild Nights. What I said about going back to it is absolutely true. I find I go back and get that out very frequently to try and feel some inspiration.
That interested me when you said that to her, and then she was saying that she regularly turns to other people to increase ability to form sentences.
Yeah. And the way she said, you know, she's just trying to write the next poem, I just thought, thank heavens, here's someone who's just honest about the uphill struggle it is to write a decent bloody poem, you know, one foot in front of the other, basically. And I really like that. She's got a fascinating background as well. I did a little bit of research, and her mother was a world-class tennis player who won Wimbledon in the days when it was amateur.
Yeah.
So she's had a really.
Her daughter's an actress, isn't she?
Her daughter's an actress, and she's in some very big, long-running Netflix series, or may not be Netflix, but that kind of thing in the States. You know, she's well known.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting family.
My favourite of her poems was that poem Florida.
Oh yeah.
I just, the sort of mental images of her on top of a guy and looking at the wall and seeing that a stain on the wall that looks like Florida. And that taking her into that kind of imaginary world and things.
Yes, it took her back and remembering, being on the beach with her brother and stuff. And then you're just thinking, oh my God, all this is going on.
And then she says, in the universe behind me, there's this guy kind of reaching his climax, as it were. And but I just, there's something quite funny, and there's a bit of a slightly tragic and everything. But what I like about, she was saying she's comfortable with the eye of a poem being a persona, that it's not.
Yeah.
I really need to hear that because, at the moment where I am with my own stuff, I want to write things without people thinking, that appalling behaviour is exactly what, I, Peter Kenny, did. Just being able to sort of say, right, there's an I in this poem, but it's not me, because there are also so many people that are cringingly earnest about that, aren't they?
Yeah. We had this discussion about, and with Catherine Maris, about fiction and poetry, definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's worth reiterating.
And the other poem I like was the stay one at the end, with the white roses and so on.
Yes,
but I like that, how suddenly talking about being on the sand and the things that sort of ground up bits of creatures from the Paleozoic, and just that kind of sudden moment of absolute perspective millions of years ago. Just think of life in those terms and things won't seem quite so bad, get yourself in perspective.
Yeah, that's true. And I think she does have this ability to, the poems, a bit like we said about Florida, but she just has this ability of just taking you somewhere where you're not expecting you're going to go, and then still bring you back. You're still in that place, but you've gone somewhere else, like an out-of-body experience. So we've been waiting to hear all about what you've been up to, Peter, in the holidays. I know you've been out and about. You're going to tell us a bit more.
Yeah, it feels like that, when you come back from term, you come back from the summer holiday at school and you have to write an essay called What I Did in My Holiday.
And then you have to do a sort of presentation, don't you?
Well, yeah, mainly I seem to do far too much work because I work freelance, and I tend to do work that covers for other people that are on holiday. The summer tends to be quite a busy time for me. So, but we did go zooming off to Wales and also Herefordshire, so kind of all around the bordery area. And I went to Hay-on-Wye, not for the festival, just to see the place because I'd never been there.
I've never been there either.
It's super beautiful, quite small. But the sort of chief treasure there was this bookshop called the Poetry Bookshop, which was just a sort of fairly decent-sized bookshop, and it was just full of poetry. And I had a sort of strange reaction to it, really, because I kind of walked in there thinking, rubbing my hands together, but I just got overloaded. And there was a sense of just like, I was either going to come out of there with 3 books, which is what I did, or 300, but there didn't sit. I couldn't quite get to a middle ground where I bought, half a dozen or more. It was just too much. Yeah. I was overwhelmed.
Well, I'm interested in this. So how were they actually organised? You can't put poetry into different genres, or was it just all alphabetical order, or what?
Yeah, I seem to think it was mainly alphabetical, but they had some of those kind of, those swivelly stands. Like I saw a swivelly Shearsman stand, for example, with just all their books on and things.
Oh,
but
yeah.
There was that sense of kind of just browsing through and thinking, oh, I know that person, or, yeah, I once met that person, or it was kind of, an interesting experience of like, I don't know, that's where all poets collect. Their souls are all collected in the Poetry Bookshop in Hay-on-Wye. I bought a book by R.S. Thomas called Collected Later Poems, and it's 1988 to 2000. Do you know R.S. Thomas's stuff?
I really don't. I'm ashamed to say it, really, because I do remember once having Gillian Clark on a course, telling us all, you must all go out and read R.S. Thomas.
Yeah. Well, I first heard him read it when I was about 22, and I was at Warwick University, and I was living in Leamington, and there was a poetry group there that I used to go to, and R.S. Thomas came along. And because I was kind of pals with the bloke that was running it, I used to get to sit with, all the poets. So I met all kinds of people like Elizabeth Jennings and George Barker and, R.S. Thomas. Well, R.S. Thomas was like an Old Testament prophet, because he was an Anglican priest in Wales, but the way he read was extraordinary. I'd never seen anything like it. He just came in and stood up all the time, even though, he was probably about 70 then, but stood ramrod straight and didn't bother with any titles for the poems, and just spoke in this electrifying kind of, like, I keep saying Old Testament prophet, but it was just like that. You just felt like, oh my God. And it left such an impression on me that I sort of dipped into his work over the years since, and, have had copies of his poetry. One thing I like is that obviously he's a priest, but he writes about God quite a bit, but not from a kind of wishy-washy kind of God's great, isn't he? He's struggling with God all the time, and just kind of, it just feels absolutely visceral and a matter of life and death. And actually writing about God isn't terribly fashionable at the moment, but it's such a huge canvas. There's other parts of his work that are really quite tender. Maybe I'll read one of those. His poems tend to be quite short, but this is devastating. He wrote it after his wife died. It's called A Marriage. We met under a shower of bird notes. 50 years past love's moment in a world in servitude to time. She was young. I kissed with my eyes closed and opened them on her wrinkles. Come, said Death, choosing her as his partner for the last dance. And she, who in life had done everything with a bird's grace, opened her bill now for the shedding of one sigh no heavier than a feather.
Gosh, that's beautiful, isn't it? Really.
Yeah,
sad.
Just it's so tender, and kind of this idea of just sort of kissing someone when they're young and opening your eye, and on their wrinkles, and them being together for decades. There was something
really
absolutely lovely about that. Anyway, my infatuation with R.S. Thomas continues, and his collected later poems are all poems he wrote after the age of about 75.
Gosh.
Because he died when he was 87. And there's loads of them, and they're really high quality. So there's hope for us all yet.
Yeah, he just kept writing. Fantastic.
So how about you, Robin? What's been drifting across your horizon?
Well, I was just going to mention a couple of things. Now, there was the launch of Finished Creatures magazine, which we both went to, didn't we?
Yeah.
And indeed you read it because you had a poem in it. I was just there as a sort of a hanger-on. But that was a really nice event, because that's the first, and only live reading I've been to in the last 18 months. I don't know about you.
Yeah, same.
So it felt quite momentous in a way, didn't it? And it was a very lovely setting in Lewes, very sort of relaxed, not many people there.
I haven't read a poem in public for so long, and I forgot the comedy basics, like saying what my name was before I read and things.
Well, you weren't the only one who forgot to say their name. That's a bit of a bugbear of mine. It's just like, start by saying your name, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah.
A poetry collection that I picked up a couple of months ago is by Shane McCrae, an American poet, and it's called Sometimes I Never Suffered. I came across him in PN Review. There were 3 poems of his a few months back, which I was really taken by. So I came into this collection by Shane McCrae with high hopes. It's not quite what I was expecting. Rather than a collection of diverse poems, it's more like a book-length poem. The first section, and this character returns at the end, is based on a character called the hastily assembled angel. And it takes us from the point where he's kicked out of heaven and he has thrown down to earth, and his kind of observations and his thoughts about what happens to him. Funny you should mention about how writing about God has gone out of fashion. It strikes me a lot of people are talking about life after death and the big philosophical questions, and this is one of them. So we've got the hastily assembled angel, but in the middle section of the book, we are in the voice of a character called Jim Limber. Now, this might be a character who's more known in the States, I don't know, but basically Jim Limber, it says in the book, these are the words, it says he was the mixed race adopted son of Jefferson Davis. Now, I had to look him up. Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederate States during the American Civil War.
Okay, that gets complicated then.
So that sounds complicated. So basically, you've got this guy who was fighting for the southern states. So in other words, on the side of pro-slavery, adopting a mixed-race boy, which itself throws up all kinds of questions. And this is a real character, apparently. Jim Limber did exist. And so we have this section, which is basically entitled Variations on Jim Limber Goes to Heaven. So in his voice, there's a series of poems which are, he has just found his way. He's just dead and he's in heaven and he's trying to make sense of what he's seeing. So we've got this counterplay between the angel who's fallen from heaven, trying to make sense of what he's seeing on earth, and Jim Limber, who is negotiating his way around heaven. And it all sounds a bit heavyweight, but in fact, it's very personal and very arresting, and the language is vivid. Shane McCrae writes in very interesting form. You look at the page, you think, oh, it's quatrains. And then it's not just as simple as that. He puts in these gaps, what do you call them, between words? I mean, I use them myself. I don't know what to call them. Spaces and things occasionally. Caesura. He uses that quite a lot. He's quite sparing with his punctuation. And he often capitalizes the first word of a line, even when the sense runs through. So I sometimes found that spooked me a bit as I was reading it. So I'm really enjoying this. It's unusual. It's intriguing and rich in ideas. Not just exploring ideas of race and colour, but faith, life and death, etc.
It's just rooted in that one Character, and
the one character, the two characters, the angel and Jim Limber. Yeah.
And from that relationship, all kinds of things are unpacked.
Well, the two don't meet. They're two separate characters, but in reading the book, in reading the experiences of the one and then straight into the other, the reader makes those connections, I think.
That sounds really interesting.
So, it was interesting. Shall I read a little?
Yeah, a little flavour. Jim Limber is just an amazing name, isn't it?
It is. I might read two. They're not, one is The Hastily Assembled Angel, and then I might do one from Jim Limber, but they're quite short.
Cool.
So this is called The Hastily Assembled Angel Considers the Lives of Dogs and of People. The hastily assembled angel wanders, and has wandered, through centuries of cities and countries, and millennia of cities and countries, and of women and of men. There's no hurry now, though he was hurriedly once brought to being, and bears the scars of that, though slowly in the earth, though slowly he eventually began to wonder what the hurry had been for. And if he could have been a better angel, or have done better the job he did, if once they'd made him, the other angels, had allowed him to meet God. For he has been uncertain, as people are uncertain. He has never been as certain as dogs are, who sniff the wind that moves the curtain, and see behind the curtain.
I just love the way that ended with that little detail of just behind the curtain. It was, like you said, so domestic and such a kind of small image, and yet what's gone before is really quite vast and interesting. Yeah.
This is the last of the Jim Limber poems, I believe. Yes, this is the last of the Jim Limber poems. It's called Jim Limber on Possibility. What if I had been born in heaven? Do they do that here? I've never seen a baby, but I see full-grown people who I hear the angels whispering, they say they were babies when they died. I always look those people in the eye, but I don't think they see me. And I've never heard them speak. They just walk around in sailor hats with blank looks on their faces. Those white hats with the blue anchors. I sometimes see them walking with their mouths open, The first one I saw like that. And when I tried to talk to him, it was like I wasn't there. So I peeked in his mouth. And in his mouth was the whole sky and stars.
Gosh, I love that.
Lovely, isn't it?
Yeah. They're sort of like the people dressed as sailors.
The sailor hats, yes.
Yeah.
Extraordinary detail.
God, I think I'd have to read that a few times to really get into it.
Oh, yeah, totally. And this is what I found.
One of those dipping in books, I call them, where especially more enigmatic books that kind of keep intriguing you, that you keep returning to.
Yeah.
I had that a bit with Rachel Boast's void studies that perplexed me so much that I kept returning to it.
Oh, well, that's good, isn't it? If you want to return rather than putting it down and thinking, pah, then that's definitely a good sign, because that's sometimes the way, isn't it? It's funny you were talking earlier, Peter, about meeting famous poets in the flesh back in the day, because we've been mingling, hobnobbing even, haven't we, with some famous poets, or at least poet mates of ours.
In the pub.
Down the pub. In the pub. We went to the pub. How much fun was that?
It was just to be able to be amongst people that share your obsessions and just to gossip and moan and whinge and have a laugh about things. Because much as I love my dear family and friends, there are not many of them that are actually that interested in poetry. And
Yep.
and to talk to people about, say, the pain of rejection, the idea that they themselves have had things rejected in the last whatever. There's nobody understands the pain of being a poet like another poet, really. And if you're not bitter competitors but actually mates, it just makes it feel really nice.
Yeah. But we were also celebrating one or two successes, weren't we? I'm not sure we can talk about them, so we'll have to bring them to you at a later time.
It's the deliciousness of knowing that when nobody else does.
Ooh, it's a bit like on Twitter, isn't it? When you get those tweets, people say, I've had some fantastic news. Can't tell you about it yet, though. It's just like, well, why that? Did you even tell us in the first place?
Yeah. I'd love to be in a position to be able to do that one day.